on the mobile side, I know it's all private. Definitely, I totally agree with you there. But the original fixed line network, all those ducts and poles that people are talking about, that was all done with public sector money in the first place. Those ducts and poles are really old. That's
fine.
all.
Fine. But I'm still saying it's not comparable.
It's not the fibre
that's
expensive. It's the digging up the streets to put it in. That's the expensive side of it.
Well, okay, fine. But
I think you're agreeing with each other on the mobile side.
On the mobile side,
yeah, fine. But all the last mile stuff, they're still digging up streets.
Civil engineering is most of the cost.
But they're still doing that now. They're still doing that for fibre.
Hello and welcome back to the Telecoms.com podcast, our first one of 2020 and our first one because we just sort of couldn't be bothered towards the second half of December. So I think Pierre, first one for 23 days, is that right?
Yeah, that's what
so I don't know how Pierre and the rest of the world has coped without it, but here we are, bravely stepping back into the breach. I'm joined by the regulars of Jamie and Ian from Light Reading. Welcome back, guys. Have a fun Christmas break? Yeah. Did you go back to Wales?
Yeah.
Lark about there?
Yeah.
Anything?
Larked about in Buckinghamshire.
Buckinghamshire. I went to Suffolk for a week. Stayed in a
Nice up
cottage,
there.
which is all going well until the last day when the dog decided to throw up in the bedroom, which was dull.
So you had the last day cleaning up.
Well, and the problem is he then thought, I know what will make it better. I'll shred the carpet up to hide the evidence. So then we had to we didn't tell them until we'd already legged it. And then I sent them a text going, yeah, sorry. And they went, all right, well, we'll get it sorted and we'll send you the bill. And I sort of thought, well, I've got to go for it, really. But it only ended up costing 90 quid. I thought, God knows what it could be. You know, what if they went, right, we've got to change the whole carpet. Yeah. In fact, we've got to just level the house and build it again.
Yeah.
So you never know how carried away people are going to get.
No.
But they were quite civil, so hurrah for that. And I wasn't forced to punt the dog into next week. Not that I'd ever do that, animal rights people, I hasten to add. Anyway,
There's a lot of them watching.
Well, yes. There's that big overlap between telecoms and animal rights and vegans. Yeah. Okay, so what are we going to chat about this week? I think we're going to have to mention CES just because it's a big tech show of the year, although it's not necessarily mega telecoms-y, but we'll nod to it. I think we've got to mention the perennial favourite of Huawei because there's some stuff on the immediate horizon concerning them and 5G networks and all that jazz. And then we're going to finish off, somewhat surprisingly, talking about Northern Irish farmers, as you do. Because Jamie...
Someone's got to talk about them.
Yeah, because Jamie's shown an interest in an arm wrestle over the matter of telecoms access to sort of farmland and all that sort of thing.
It's a sort of Celtic affinity with
exactly
Northern Irish sheep farmers.
Jamie's got a certain understanding with Northern Irish people that you and I couldn't possibly understand. So that's that. And then before we start, just to remind you that if you're watching it on Facebook or on YouTube or on the website, you can listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, or loads of other podcasting platforms. Not bad after a 23-day break, Pierre?
Good.
Sharp.
I was ready.
It's the avoidance of alcohol that is...
Yes, and I'm on dry January, so I'm especially tetchy and humourless. In fact, we just went to the pub and I had a soda water. And my big treat was that they put plenty of lime in, so I actually squeezed some of the lime into soda water. I think that soda
water cost about 30p or something.
Did it? Oh, normally it's the opposite. Normally they can rip you off over soft drinks.
I had a proper drink with it.
Yeah, and it still came to £6
was
or
like
something.
£6 something. So. In fact, they were just free because they took sympathy on you.
Oh, excuse me.
See, look what it does to you.
Yeah, I'm allergic to not drinking.
Yeah.
Okay, so CES. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. There hasn't been a ton of stuff going on that's telecoms-y, so I might be slightly scraping the bottom of the barrel. The thing that caught my eye that I wrote about was yet another new video streaming service, which has actually been around for a while, or at least in incubation for a while. But they had one of those sort of keynotes at CES to sort of bang on about it. And it's called Quibi, which is an abbreviation of Quick Bites. And the whole point of Quibi is that it's original video content, but specifically filmed and offered up to be consumed on mobile phones.
Right.
Now, And then they say inevitably they're targeting millennials, whatever a millennial is. I mean,
people with short attention spans.
Yeah, exactly. So the assumption is that millennials, which I think is...
Someone who was born between 1983 and 1999.
Are you a millennial?
Yeah,
are you a millennial?
They're both millennials.
Well,
then.
if Jamie's typical of millennials, then they definitely have short attention spans. So yes, quick bites. So as we've often joked about on the pod, Jamie doesn't mind multitasking, podding, and dicking about on his phone at the same time. Do you think, therefore, Jamie, as a millennial, which I so conspicuously am not, that a source of sort of 5 to 10 minute sort of video quick bites would be something that would appeal to you?
No.
Why not?
It's too long.
I came across this a couple of months back at IPC, and and I thought it's an interesting idea, but I mean I'm not 100% sure how much legs is in it.
What if you're doing your thing now, where instead of playing one of your games or whatever, you just had a quick 5-minute catch up on some serial some sort of
it sounds
series?
Like the sort of thing you get on YouTube, no?
Well, that's a very good point.
And I think maybe that's the market they're competing against more than...
Or TikTok.
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, it's still... don't forget, like, YouTube is still it's a beast on its own. Firstly, it's user-generated content, but then also it's free to consume and it's ad-supported. I mean, this is hidden behind a paywall, and it's
there's
professional.
There's an ad-supported
there's an ad-supported version.
Yeah, you can subscribe to YouTube stuff, but...
Yeah, but then
you would.
I mean, I don't think it'll work for the context you put, because you need sound on it, and the vast majority of people, when they're doing something that's distracted, just to distract themselves on the phone for a couple of minutes,
so they've at least got to have some
silence.
They've at least got to have some earbuds in, or something like that.
Unfortunately, people don't have it on silent a lot these days. I've noticed increasingly.
Oh, really?
Well, I increasingly come across people in cafes watching clips and doing stuff where the volume's turned up, they don't have headphones on. It's like that really winds me up. It's just... I mean, it's just bad at social etiquette.
I completely
and this
millennials,
stupid Quibbly or whatever it's called, it sounds like it's going to make that even worse.
Yeah. The big question I would ask is, number one, are you going to pay as much for this as a Netflix subscription?
Yeah, which is more or less what it is.
I pay about 50p a month for it.
Well, you won't.
But it comes
the
in.
programs are really good.
It comes in at a fiver with ads and £8. Well, this is dollars, but typically it goes when it comes here, it'll just be straight exchange.
So they're like short stories or something.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
5 to 10 minutes.
5 to 10 minutes.
So what they'll do is they'll film. I mean, they've got. So, but before we move on, I want to say that I actually think Jamie and Ian are both right in this. In that, Jamie's right to say it's not a competitor of YouTube because these guys are targeting premium rather than user-generated. But I think Ian's right in that it is a competitor of YouTube in consumption style, i.e. quick video bites on your phone. So what it's attempting to be is like the YouTube of premium. And that's my interpretation. Feel free to disagree, Jamie. But and one of the things that makes me think that is just the sheer amount of establishment entertainment industry backing it has.
Well, people are going to watch it on mobile devices, aren't they? You're not going to sit down.
Well, that's the only place you can.
With them, right? Okay.
Oh,
I didn't realise that it was.
Sorry, I didn't make that clear enough. The whole
TV.
point of it is it's mobile only.
Okay.
The other thing I'm not entirely convinced by, and don't get me wrong, I mean they're doing everything right, like you mentioned, because they've got some massive names behind it, and also the people
studios,
they hired,
individuals.
What actors? Top actors?
No, hired as in to run the company. So,
but they have got top actors as well.
So people like Chris Hemsworth are going to turn up and do a 10-minute Thor episode,
something like that. Yeah,
like this is Thor taking on.
Stephen King has signed.
Spielberg, isn't it, or both? Spielberg definitely has.
Spielberg definitely has. I think
I've got something I want to say about
that. King adapted stuff.
Right.
I know Kevin Hart was doing a series on it.
They've got all the Hollywood establishment on board. I mean, in their little trailer, they had Reese Witherspoon doing her little chirpy bit about it.
But they also have, when I say hired, I mean actually from a management side as well. So it's run by Meg Whitman, who's the former CEO of HP,
and before that, eBay.
Yeah. But her time at HP was a disaster, wasn't it? It was an utter disaster.
Well, I think she was brought in a little, to some extent, to sort of clear it up.
Yeah,
I think a lot of the real disaster happened prior to her.
It wasn't in a good position.
Like the acquisition of that,
I don't think she joined
UK software company where they got completely rinsed.
Position.
Right. Yeah, I don't think her brand has been tarnished by association with HP.
It's not risen as a result.
But she made her name at eBay. I think
there's another one, and the other guy that they hired. Who's the Hollywood big
dude.
wig, isn't he?
Yeah, and so they're using those two to position it as the perfect sort of.
So Whitman's like the CFO or something, or
no,
CEO.
She's the
CEO
CEO,
of
and he's
it, right?
Yeah,
Which I mean, she was the CEO of HP.
Yeah.
no, she's Silicon Valley royalty.
Yeah.
Katzenberg is Hollywood royalty. So they're saying
he's a studio executive.
Yeah, he headed up, I think, one of the ones like DreamWorks or whatever, the other one that makes sort of cartoons.
Pixar.
It's one of those.
One of those, yeah.
And so obviously not only do they have a presumed competence by virtue of that experience, but they know all the right people. And that seems to have paid dividends. And I think they've raised over $1 billion, and most of it's from establishment sources. This isn't crowdfunding.
Yeah.
This is people like NBC and whoever chucking some money in the pot.
Disney is thrown in there as well.
So that, I think that makes me believe that they are going to produce content that will get people's attention.
Katzenberg was at Disney for 10 years.
Right.
Yeah,
so that means Pixar then after, I guess.
84 to 94. Yeah.
So yeah, they all know
That's
their stuff.
Disney in another life, isn't it? 84 to 94 Disney. That's like
It's when the good stuff came out.
Disney.
Yeah, that's when
It's
the
a
good
different
stuff
type of
came out.
company now. Yeah.
Lion King, Aladdin, come on. The real Disney stuff.
I mean, you had me at Lion King.
Although Lion King was 94, so I was just...
Do you know what? I've never seen Lion King, so I don't
There's a
know
new
what
one
I'm
out
talking
now. There's a film version.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
terrible.
Is it?
Yeah, because there's no expression on... Anyway, sorry.
about. Yeah.
Keep going.
Well, my 9-year-old
so-
liked it.
So anyway, so I think it could succeed from that point of view, but I share Jamie's scepticism about whether or not, certainly I, and obviously I'm not representative of their target market, would want to consume this bite-size video. I think the only way it works, and we may be coming towards a time, which will lead me in a bit onto another bit of CES news, where everyone's got sort of earbuds in the whole time. Or one in, maybe.
Or they're all just playing their phones without putting earbuds in and irritating the rest of us.
But I think if we accept that there will still be some social opprobrium about that, then maybe we'll come to a time, and maybe this will be required for things like Quibi to take off, where everyone's just got a very almost invisible sort of earbud just sitting in their ear the whole time. And that could be the future. You know, the sort of multitasking that Jamie does could be taken to the next level, where people are constantly having conversations while they're listening to stuff at the same time, which would be a bit weird.
Yeah. I agree with you that with that point, in that it's potentially a good idea, but realistically, are the market conditions in place now for it to work? And the other point is, I mean, who are you going to pay? Is anyone going to pay
$5 a month
for an ad-supported version?
Right.
I think that's I think they'll find that very, very difficult.
So you're about to consume a 5-minute bit of video, and 30 seconds of it is ads.
Yeah. And all of a sudden, and you're paying for the pleasure of that.
Yeah.
You know, the model which exists nowadays, that if you pay for something, excluding like Sky, let's say, but digitally native service, if you are paying for something, you don't have ads. Netflix, Disney Plus, HBO, what is it? Even like the YouTube.
Yeah.
When you pay for the service, you don't get ads.
Yeah.
Amazon Prime, they're breaking the mold there, and I don't know.
But they do have an ad-free version
so you pay and it's ads as well.
Yeah. So £5 with ads, £8 without ads. Now the thing,
£8's a lot without ads for some stuff. 10-minute.
Yeah.
How many of these things are going to be? You know,
Well, that's the other thing.
said
they're not
3
got
hour
a back catalogue to reach into.
Is the library going to be?
It's
big
all
enough?
going to be. It's all going to be new stuff.
it's all original
no one's ever
programming.
written
Yeah.
stuff like that before.
They say 3 hours of stuff a day is what their public sort of commitment is to content. 3 hours of fresh content
So a
every
lot of
day.
it's going to be utter shit, because there's no way
I
that
think
big
that's
name
a fair
actors are
assumption.
going to commit to doing
No.
a load of 10-minute shorts.
I'll tell you one other thing that annoys me about it. I think that in their CES keynote, they had a new feature. So this thing's been bubbling in the background for a while. Jamie wrote about it in September. So people like Ed Barton, who I consulted for my piece, would obviously been aware of it for ages. But this big reveal is a new feature that they invented called, oh God, it's gone. Anyway,
You need to start drinking again.
I know. I'm getting all fuzzy.
I mean,
maybe I've been drinking so long.
The deterioration in your abilities
that I'm only at full sort of full capacity when I've had a cheeky couple. Anyway, basically you can view the content like this or like this and shift it dynamically.
Right.
Which I think is quite so. Sorry for people who are listening. In portrait or landscape mode on your phone.
And there's Samsung released a TV. Well, they announced a TV that does that as well.
Right.
It rotates
TV?
on its own. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's just weird.
It's annoying.
So you've got a TV rotating in your living room while you're trying
if you're watching, yeah.
It seemed well, and they were making out that it's a really big deal, but then there's sort of proof points for why it's a big deal. Basically, most of the time they were showing a bit of footage, and obviously, people making the content have to shoot it to frame it right.
Yeah.
So, but then basically, portrait. All it seemed to be.
Portrait's never used at all in cinema, and why you'd want to use it?
No, but then that's how you hold a phone normally.
Yeah, that's true, but
to watch something in landscape, you either have to go through.
But you're not going to be doing that, are you? I'm guessing you mean it.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to lead up to.
Then it forces you to shift it.
Well, I think that's needlessly gimmicky, and also from the demo they put on, portrait just looks like a cropped and zoomed version of landscape.
Yeah.
So they've just cropped the central rectangle from the landscape and zoomed it. So I wasn't that impressed by that thing, such that I can't even remember the brand they gave it. There was one other thing where they showed a bit of footage where, if depending on how you hold it, you actually get a completely different thing. So I think there was some drama where a woman was at home and someone was ringing a doorbell, and you could see it's like a Nest doorbell,
right.
So you could see the person. And when you looked at a landscape, you saw the woman responding to the doorbell, and then when you looked at it in portrait, it switched to this geezer who turned out to be some kind of belligerent. But I don't think, again, this could just be inertia, but the user experience of constantly switching like that.
I don't think that's going to take
So
off.
they made it out to be a big deal. I wasn't so impressed with that. And one other
it's like
gimmick.
a novel with PowerPoint pages in the middle of it, isn't it?
Yeah, again, I mean, I have a rich history of new technology coming along, me being the Luddite and going, what's the point of that? Yeah. I mean, I said that about iPads, for example. They're just bloody big iPods. What's the point of that? So, I've got it wrong lots of times. But, yeah, I'm just struggling to see the point of that thing. And then there was one other thing. They've got Steven Spielberg to make a series called After Dark.
All right.
And the novelty is that using the photo sensors on your phone, you literally can't watch it until it's dark. And you sort of think, on one level, you sort of think, oh, okay, yeah, because it's spooky. But you think, well, what if I want to watch it at lunchtime?
Put your finger over the
and you
sensor.
won't let me.
Just put your finger over the sensor.
I suppose so.
That's just weird.
Yeah. You could probably turn it off as well. But they seem to think that was a cool... They were positioning that as a proof point of why content viewed on phones has a unique...
Such a
thing.
gimmick.
But
that is really
yeah,
gimmick.
I'm not convinced by that one.
He gets stuck into any of this stuff, though, doesn't he, Steven Spielberg? Any company that's doing something new that's streaming, he seems to... Like, he was quite... I think he was quite high profile. Apple's whole TV.
Yeah, he jumps on the bandwagon. Reese Witherspoon seems to jump on the bandwagon.
She does as well. I don't see.
Perhaps there's some sort of bundle of him, Reese Witherspoon, and some other.
It's really weird to see billionaires selling out.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Martin Scorsese is saying that anything's not all the cinema isn't really film.
Right.
Yeah. Was it him who said that?
Yeah.
You'd know. Yeah. He had a real go at Marvel films, didn't he?
The Marvel theme park rides.
Yeah. At the very entertaining Golden Globes.
Yeah, so that fed Gervais's cuss saying, I don't know what he's doing at a theme park. He's too small to get on any of the rides.
That's brilliant.
Yes. Well, I mean, that was interesting. Obviously, this isn't necessarily a place to dwell at great length on Gervais's monologue at the Golden Globes, but the fact that he made the point at the start that basically film industry, TV industry are all dead.
Yeah,
it's all Netflix now. He was saying it comedically, but only half comedically. I think he sort of meant it as well.
Do you think that, this is a massive tangent, but the thing that surprised me about that was how many opinion pieces got written sort of saying that he went way over the top and how disgraceful it was that he upset Hollywood to that extent.
Well, yes, it's sad. It doesn't surprise me, but it is sad. You have to wonder. Yeah, people talk about punching up.
It's the first week of January. I mean, we need to get offended quickly,
If any people need taking the piss out of them a little bit and being brought down, surely it's Hollywood.
Or the CEO of Apple.
Or the CEO of Apple, yeah, exactly.
I think people just are uncomfortable with roasting sort of scenarios. So one other thing before we move on that is slightly related to this that I want to mention about CES is they announced a new flavour of Bluetooth which is again sort of
we need one of those
tenuously.
because Bluetooth's rubbish.
Well, this is better Bluetooth. It's called Bluetooth LE audio, I think.
Right.
So LE is low energy. I think LE was already around, but they've tailored it to audio. And there's a few other little features like multi-streaming, so multiple Bluetooth peripherals can listen to the same source. And there's some kind of broadcast as well. So you could, using just your peripheral, I could send something to your Bluetooth headset, presumably through some sort of particularly laborious pairing process. But, there's that. But just the low energy part of it is interesting because in principle that should feed into smaller form factors. So we've got the default Bluetooth headset, which is these Apple earbuds that have got that little sort of 1-inch stem coming down from them.
They fall out of my ears, but...
Right.
Well, not the new ones.
I haven't tried those.
They have
very
rubber
new
tips.
ones.
Yeah.
So, but presumably we could be getting towards a time where something you can almost not even see it when it's in someone's ear. And that could lead to that sort of dystopia that we were just talking about, where people have just got one in the whole time.
How do you pluck it out, though?
Yes, well, presumably.
I don't like the things that go in your ear, and I don't like the big noise cancelling things.
Which do you like then?
There's ones that sort of hook over your ear.
Okay.
Which actually stay on. Like if you go out for a run, you can run and the
like little cups. Yeah.
There's like just a thing on the back of it. That So it actually stays
and Bose
in your
makes
ear.
a weird one where it's like a scarf. You put it on your shoulders and it just plays music from below. It's really weird.
So other people can hear it.
It's very quiet for other people, but it's really loud for whoever wears it. But it's more of a desktop situation, listening. Yeah.
So that, while it's quite geeky and boring, I think that could be quite interesting in terms of wearables and all that sort of thing. I certainly think we got to a stage now where wearing wired headphones just feels like a real drag.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So anyway, that's pretty much CES. Not too much phony stuff.
No, they were foldable laptops. Well, that's not really phone either.
Yeah, thanks, Pierre. I
thought
you just can't get the stuff.
No, but it's the foldable.
You want a foldable laptop?
Yeah.
My laptop folds already.
No,
They all
foldable
laptops
screen
fold.
is what I mean. So it's kind of relatable to phones because phones are going to go that way too. So there is some.
Oh, so you're saying it's like a
connection
big
here.
version of the foldy phones? It's
Yeah,
it's all screen.
So it's like a laptop
Well,
that's
folds out several times, like a piece of paper.
no, just once. It's
Is
just like
Is there a laptop you can make into a little swan or
imagine
bird?
It's an origami laptop.
Yeah, an origami. Imagine like an iPad that folds, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's one great big screen.
Yeah.
One great big foldy screen.
Lenovo, I think, had one, and another
Right.
company had one. Yeah.
Okay. Would you go for one of those?
No, I like a real keyboard.
You need a proper keyboard, don't you?
Yeah.
Although I remember when I was writing about mobile phones like a decade ago, and I had a Motorola one that had a little slide-out keyboard, and I was like, I'd never go for that touchscreen bollocks. Yeah.
And here you are.
Another home run for Scott there. So,
Because you write an article saying it never take off. This touchscreen stuff's a load of nonsense.
Basically, if you want something to take off, get me to write a skeptical article about it, and it's a surefire winner.
Bitcoin, that'll never go up.
Exactly. Okay, yes. So let's get back to the perennial subject of Huawei. I don't think you need me to talk about it at ridiculous length, but
what's going on, really?
Well, thanks for pouring water on my segue. You say it's not going on, but you just said that there had been some op-ed written.
There was an op-ed written by the Chinese ambassador to the UK.
Right.
Can't remember his name.
Don't guess it. That will sound.
I'm not going to
racist.
guess it. I could look it up on my phone, but I can't because it's turned off to not causing microphone problems. But he wrote an op-ed in the Daily Telegraph on Sunday, basically saying don't ban Huawei because it would. Siding with Huawei, essentially saying it would set the UK back.
This is the Chinese ambassador.
Chinese ambassador to the UK saying that the decision, which keeps getting put off, that has never really been finalised about whether Huawei should be allowed to sell 5G equipment in the UK. He was basically saying,
Liu Xiaoming.
There you are.
Okay.
Yeah, he said banning Huawei would be bad because. So a lot of the arguments that the operators have been coming out with about it driving up 5G costs because you have to replace equipment, it would slow down 5G rollout in the UK, it'd set the UK back. But then he also said the more interesting bit was that it would damage relations between China and the UK, which is almost like a slightly sort of veiled threat, isn't it? It's
pretty
kind of
much.
Like, don't ban it
barely
otherwise.
veiled, is it?
So and then I noticed so Time stuff's quite hard to get hold of. The Sunday Times, unless you actually subscribe, it's all behind firewall.
Their paywalls,
Telegraph, I think.
Their paywall's quite Times, robust, isn't it?
But then they're both the same.
They've got better at paywalls these days.
But then he basically tweeted his entire article. You can do that thing with Tweet where you just put a paragraph up each time, and like you have a sort of sequence of. So you put the whole thing more or less up on Twitter, which is where I came across it. And
presumably the Times are going, oh, cheers.
But I thought it was interesting because at the same time, apparently the US has been.
So that's the one that Jamie and I have been writing about. So mine was just a bit of journalism from Reuters. That they were sending sort of diplomatic missions over. So apparently, people are expecting us to make a call on Huawei and 5G by the end of this month.
Okay.
Which is why activity is ramping up. So and Dominic Raab, our foreign secretary's been over in the States chatting to Mike Pompeo, and he's been going, "Come on, mate." And then Jamie, why don't you tell us about your senator? What's he up to?
Tom Cotton tabled a bill which would ban intelligence sharing between any country which has 5G in its Huawei in its 5G network.
So outright law, not even a matter of discretion.
And Huawei anywhere in the network. There's no kind of distinction over where it would be. It's just anywhere in the network.
No, 5G network.
Yeah.
Right. But no.
The 5G
network. Yeah. That's what they put down at the moment. So it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because
4G, 3G.
Because that's the fudge that I presume the UK would like to do, is not in the core, but will allow it in the RAN.
Yeah, so I wrote a bit about this leading up to Christmas, actually, that whole RAN core issue, because I still find that quite interesting, that there's the operators in the UK are clearly proceeding on the basis that they think it's okay to use Huawei in the RAN.
Yeah.
Because all of them are using it in the RAN and they're carrying on building out their networks, while this argument's going on. But they've all pretty much taken a decision not to. Well, I don't know very much about O2's position. Maybe Jamie, has more to do with O2 than I do. But certainly Three, Vodafone, and BT have all pretty much taken the decision they're not going to use Chinese equipment in the core 5G network.
Yeah.
But they'll use it in the RAN.
Yeah.
And it's quite an interesting one because some of the vendors themselves seem to be at odds with that argument entirely. I mean, like Ericsson, for instance. I remember speaking to Ericsson's European head a few months ago, around about the time we had a summer party, I think, with them in London when they had, journalists over a few drinks.
Yeah.
And Aaron Bansal's his name, and he was saying that he thinks this whole distinction between the core and the RAN is becoming less relevant. It's becoming a lot harder to say where one ends and the other begins because because you're sort of pushing intelligence further out. With the move to edge computing, you're sort of putting your intelligence closer to masts and base stations. He said the whole distinction between the core and the RAN is becoming a lot harder to say where one ends.
If you have a look at it from like the Open RAN perspective, I mean one. Which sort of supports his argument, and I think to start from the very beginning, I think the big issue between the US and European operators is that Europe generally views as dumb and intelligent segments in the network, i.e., dumb is radio and transmission, and intelligent is the core, whereas the US view the network as a single entity. So intelligence and dumbness can be anywhere in the network. So this is where the idea of so Scott Petty talks about it a lot over at Vodafone about risk mitigation in the network. This is where this argument evolves from and is completely ignored in the States. But one of the reasons one of the reasons that Open RAN hasn't entirely taken off is because it's very difficult, very, very, very difficult to decouple software and hardware. So you still have, and this is where it ties into the Ericsson argument, if you can't completely decouple software and hardware, there is going to be still some intelligence embedded into these hardware products, so they're not as dumb as everyone is making out. And perhaps that does actually lend some credibility to the US argument that any product from a nefarious government-controlled company, and I'm not saying Huawei is a government-controlled company.
That's the accusation.
That's the accusation. Is a threat.
Yeah, completely. But I just find it really interesting that the vendors, a big vendor like Ericsson, is basically at odds with its own customers on this issue. And what we need to go out and talk to people like BT and Scott Petty and say, well, hang on a minute, aren't the lines blurring with the move to 5G? And
is there any way to have just a bit of Huawei and it be all right?
Yeah,
for the Americans?
And then if this decision that gets taken, I mean, clearly if if they do go and bow down to US pressure and decide to take a really dramatic decision that gets rid of Huawei entirely, then that's a huge issue. It's a bigger issue now than it was even 3 or 4 months ago, because every week that passes, apparently more and more equipment's being deployed. Yeah, they're supposed to be so we're being told they're extending their networks all the time. They're kind of trying to improve 5G.
Because we as a country have kicked this decision down the road because of the general election and all that sort of thing.
Unless they're just trying to extend non-Huawei vendors at the moment.
But this is what some people have said in the past, that generally sort of, I can't remember who said it to me, but someone said that Ericsson equipment, whoever has sort of like a good blend of all three, so it's definitely not going to be 3.
Yeah.
Ericsson equipment is generally used in the highly urbanized areas, and Huawei equipment is used elsewhere. So in the suburbs and the rural areas.
For Vodafone.
I can't remember who said that.
But BT's network at the moment is basically the way that they've got 2 vendors, Nokia and Huawei, in the radio. Nokia does rural, Huawei does urban.
Okay.
So their 5G rollout
is urbanized, it's got to be Huawei.
So it's got to be Huawei that they're building out.
Mm.
And they've got this 25 cities or whatever that they've tried to get to. And
is that an assumption based on their 4G relationships, or is that 5G commercial contract you're talking there?
Well, that's the way it worked with 4G, but that is the way they would do it with 5G, because you have to. You can't.
Not necessarily, because unless you're talking about backwards compatibility.
Yeah, but the only way you can't do it is to take out.
A load of people.
If you're going to switch it around, you'd have to take out the Huawei stuff in cities and then.
But everyone has said that there isn't a huge backwards compatibility problem, and you can build sort of like 5G systems from one vendor on top of 4G systems from another. But there is just a bit of integration work to be done.
No, that's a massive issue. That's the problem. You can't have you have to have the same 4G. This is why Vodafone's made such a big issue about it. If we're going to have to replace Huawei, we have to take out our 4G base stations and replace them with equipment from the same vendor that comes in with 5G. That's the whole kind of.
I don't know whether that's the case every single time, because.
The only way, there's a few ways around it.
3 aren't replacing their 4G network.
They are.
They're replacing all their 4G radios.
3 is replacing
every single 4G radio.
3 is replacing Samsung. So 3's network is.
Are they rip and replacing? I know that they're ripping out all Samsung. Yeah. Okay, I wasn't aware of that.
Huawei is coming in as a 5G vendor, and as part of the Huawei contract, it's replacing Samsung. And it sounds more dramatic than it is, because basically that equipment's very old. It needs replacing anyway. This gets to some of the conversations that we've had with John Strand, where you have to, at some point, you do have to replace some of this older equipment.
I get that.
But so 3 had obviously got to the point where it needed to make a decision about a 4G upgrade and replacing equipment, and it also had to decide on a 5G contract, and they've basically gone with Huawei. So the big question was, hang on a minute, you've been using Samsung on 4G, you're going to bring in Huawei as a 5G vendor, compatibility issue, but they're basically, Huawei will be phasing out so Samsung is going from the 3 network.
Yeah.
And they'll have Huawei in, basically, is there any radio supplier?
So, I mean, the long and short of it still is that an outright ban on all Huawei would
be an issue, big cost issue.
Massive issue for pretty much all UK MNOs.
Yeah, I mean, the only one that I'm aware of that isn't using Huawei a lot is O2, and I don't really know.
No, they're primarily Nokia and Ericsson.
Yeah.
I got a feeling that for some reason they got a Juniper in the core, or is that Vodafone? I can't remember.
Vodafone's got
Cisco
and someone else, but I'm not sure who else.
So the interesting thing about it for me is this is just a clear example of where geopolitics is trumping business. Excuse the pun, but you can't use that without having to excuse the pun. Because basically, as you said from that piece written by that Chinese senior official, they're saying you ban Huawei, there's going to be additional diplomatic aggro. The US is making it very clear that there's going to be diplomatic aggro. You know, that the law that this guy's proposing, that Jamie wrote about, would take it out of the hands of the executive.
Yeah.
We've got this Five Eyes alliance, and again, from an American point of view, if they truly believe that everything that goes through a bit of Huawei kit on a phone network can be intercepted by a Chinese state, then why would they collaborate on sensitive intelligence with countries where that information could be conveyed over Huawei gear? So from their point of view, I mean, obviously the case is very much unproven.
The other thing to obviously mention, which we haven't mentioned at all and completely skirted around, ultimately you are relying on the fact that Huawei is in bed with the Chinese government there.
That's the assumption.
Yeah, but it is worth pointing out is that all of this argument is moot.
Yeah.
Unless Huawei is in bed with the Chinese government, which still hasn't been proved.
Thing. Yeah, no,
it's never been proved.
I mean, that sort of came up a little bit. Another Huawei bit I wrote at the start of the year, where the FCC in the States has said they've got until early February to, they've got this thing where they're not allowing any operators who receive state funds for sort of rural bits and bobs to spend those funds with Huawei, and Huawei's taken them to court saying that's illegal what they've done. And I find it interesting that Huawei's taken to court because what they're basically saying is, all right, you're a country that's so proud of things like freedom of speech, due process, all that sort of thing. Well, are we allowed due process, or does due process not apply to foreigners or Chinese companies or whatever? And if we're allowed due process, then you've got to present evidence to justify your decision. Which seems like a perfectly rational thing for them to do. So now the FCC suddenly seems to be springing into action, going, okay, we're going to have a consultation as to whether or not what we've done is
Well, don't they think that the fact that it's a Chinese company is evidence enough? Because under Chinese law, you have to, as a Chinese company, provide documents to the Chinese state.
No. I mean, that argument undermines itself as well, because in that Chinese law, and that Chinese law does exist, there is a clause that says that you only have to obey that above clause if it doesn't break the law of the country you're in. So obviously some people can ignore it, and the cynic and the American cynic will turn around and say, well, yeah, I mean the Chinese government is just going to ignore that clause.
Yeah.
But it is in the law that there is a clause which says Huawei has to be compliant with US regulations and laws.
That seems like a slightly self-contradictory sort of clause, because if they want to intercept communications for espionage purposes, then by definition they're breaking the law. There's no law that says go ahead and spy.
Yeah,
that's cool. We all do it. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Everyone's a hypocrite about spying, aren't they?
Yeah, but I think there are laws that say that you are allowed to do it.
Really?
Yeah, because
otherwise
you wouldn't be allowed to investigate someone or get wiretaps.
It gets very convoluted.
But then at the same time, the other thing which is completely contradictory is that US Patriot Act says that the US government can force US companies to do exactly the same thing as well.
Yeah.
It's completely.
But the problem is that it's a Chinese company, and the US is at loggerheads with China, so
I think
it's kind of cursed by its national identity, really.
Yeah, and as I'm sure we've all written, Huawei's guilty of being Chinese. That's the main thing, and that's that really. Before we move on to the last thing, I'm increasingly thinking, with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, who's got a sort of closer relationship with Trump and presumably wants to maintain it because he's also the one who's most keen on us leaving Europe, and of course that adds an extra nuance to it, because we sure as hell want to stay cozy with the Americans.
Well, Brexit's a massive issue here, because they also do deals with both countries.
So I wouldn't be surprised if, as a result of Boris Johnson winning the general election, we end up taking a harder stance against Huawei than was previously thought.
But then we kind of imperil, as the Chinese ambassador was basically threatening. Then we put to the Chinese.
But if we're forced to choose, geopolitically, I think we'd choose America.
Yeah, probably right.
So anyway, that's that. Okay, before we run out of time, so Jamie, you wrote about Northern Irish farmers and their relationship with operators. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's this is something that's dating back years.
Yeah,
to start
the underlying
with.
issue. Yeah.
So the underlying issue was something called ransom rents, which was from years and years and years back. So the telcos complained that the landlords were charging too much money to rent land. And when I say
stick
landlords,
their towers on the land.
Yeah. I'm not just talking about farmers. I'm talking about building owners. So you can construct a mast on the roof, for instance. So basically, the argument is that a landlord has got the telco screwed because it costs. How much money is it going to cost to put up? Well, first of all, buy the passive equipment, then all the civils to put electric into it, so you can power the air conditioning and all that. Then you've got to buy the active equipment, blah, 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 blah. Constructing this thing probably costs you a couple of £100,000, let's say. So if the landlords chuck up the rent by 20% a year, you're going to turn around and go, hold on a minute, fine, I'll pay an extra £2,000. If it saves me 120,000, I'm going to construct another one. But if that happens 20,000 times across the year, then you start to get into a position which is very, very unattractive. So the European, the Digital Services Act or Digital Economy Act was passed in 2017, which included the Electronic Communications Code, which offers the telcos greater power in these negotiations over leasing costs and compensation for landowners. Now, back to today's story, the Ulster Farmers Union has turned around and has said that the telcos are using this law to unfairly screw over landowners, drastically reducing the compensation which is paid to the telcos. Now, I know we were talking about it before that the telcos were probably in a bad position.
Do you mean the compensation that's paid to the landowners?
Yeah. The rental, the lease. Maybe the telcos were paying too much. Maybe these third parties or the landowners themselves or their agents
taking the piss a bit.
Maybe they were taking the piss. But what it sounds like is that this law has granted way too much power
in the other direction,
and they're using it to drastically reduce costs, so it's completely overcompensating for the ransom rent position that was in the beginning. So it just sounds like a complete and utter
switcheroo.
But there's some really big problems with this. I mean, first of all, if the landowner feels he's been screwed, and I know you want to talk about this, about how you feel about owning
we'll
land.
Get onto that tangent,
If the landowner feels he's losing out in the relationship, he's just going to end the relationship. Therefore, you're one site down. Now,
so that's a reason to not overcompensate in exactly the way you described.
Exactly. So you could start losing. You could start losing masts. Then you have to pay to obviously construct a new mast in a new area, which is going to cost you.
But presumably they're all in the same position. The operators, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it could just cost
them. So at the end of the day, you just end up with less masts in a country.
Yeah. So what you'll end up with, as well as possibly the additional cost that Jamie talks about just shifting the mast
is poor
a couple hundred yards. Yeah. And I think
so everybody else
poorer
suffers,
coverage.
But the landowners do all right.
Well, I mean, not necessarily.
Well, they might not do all right. They might just go,
they just go, no, bugger it.
Then we don't want you.
Sort of everyone. Everyone's getting screwed because the landowners aren't getting their rent anymore. We're not getting the coverage. The operators are offering an inferior service.
Because there's little things like, so farmers are at the top of the list here because it was the Ulster Farmers Union. But then can you imagine what's going to happen when if we start losing antenna in central London? And, I've got a bit of sympathy for some of these landowners or these building owners, because if you build a 40-storey building in central London, how many hundreds of millions is that going to cost you? Then you have got to recover that cost. So you have got to spend, X amount making these offices ridiculously nice, so you can charge a ridiculous premium to a law firm to lease that office. Then all of a sudden you've got to say to the law firm, but there's got to be 24-hour access to this antenna which is on the roof. So we're going to have potentially workmen in boots and hard hats going up and down your lift, rubbing shoulders with your multi-million-pound customers, and then potentially smashing mirrors, denting, making everything dirty inside your building that you're paying through the nose for. So you can see why the building owners are kind of like, I want to get compensated quite handsomely for putting this stuff on the roof.
So the interesting thing to contemplate here is the sort of public-private thing, which often, when I don't know about you guys, but when I'm arguing a toss about politics with my mates, it often comes down to public versus private. I tend to be the more pro-individual, pro-free market, laissez-faire one in these debates, but I've got lots of mates who are much more collectivist and much more talking about the greater good. But if it was just an unfettered free market, I wonder where the equilibrium would end up, because presumably the farmers would try and charge as much as possible.
Yeah.
But there'd be some point beyond which there'd be a sort of bell curve, wouldn't there? There'd be a bit like a Laffer curve for tax. There'd be some point beyond which they got diminishing returns because they were ripping off the operators so much the operators just went, F you.
Yeah.
But that might be still quite a high level. And maybe that's the level it was at before this regulation you came in. But then, as we've just discussed, if you artificially undercompensate them, then there are things they can do, because it's still their land.
Yeah.
It's their property.
Yeah.
If someone says to you, Ian, I've got to be able to mess around with your house because it's in the public good. However altruistic you might think you are, there's going to come a point where you're like, hold on a sec, this is my gaff that you're messing
anyway,
with.
to some extent, but there's all sorts of building regulations. You can't make adjustments to your property
so all these discussions come down to
everybody's regulated to some
it comes down to a continuum and the ideal point in the middle. It's never the absolute. While I will tend to adopt the more laissez-faire stance, I'm not saying you can't have any rules at all.
I don't know the specifics of the Northern Ireland situation beyond what Jamie's just talked about, but what I do know is that a regular complaint of operators in not just the UK, but throughout other markets in Europe, like Germany, that's a big thing as well, and some other countries where they often go on about rights of access. This is one of the issues.
So it's not just the lease, it's the actual access,
slowing down 5G deployment. Now, if countries really care about getting 5G deployed, and it's so important that we're going to fall behind economically in the future, then...
So this is part of what the ECC takes into account. It grants the telcos greater power, not only to renegotiate contracts at lower levels than what they are today, but then also introduce, you don't have to pay extra commission for 24-hour access, or they make it easier to access these sites.
Yeah.
The big problem, which I see, is that, like the pendulum has come across so much that landowners can just turn around and go, no, we don't want this. A farmer could turn around and say, the thing is, if a telco can prove that there's no commercial use for that space, the ECC grants them the power to just go, look, here's 500 quid for the year.
Plant some corn there.
We're going to do this. So you could plant some corn. You could put a pigsty there.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're a...
that'd be the best thing, to put a pigsty there.
This is...
that would really take the piss, wouldn't it?
But this is, the most baffling thing about in a city as well is that, because what do you do with the roof? So what you can do, and this is a lawyer...
Turn it into a bar.
No, this is what a lawyer told me. You can put solar panels on there.
Right.
Don't have to plug the solar panels in.
Right.
You can just install solar panels up there.
Okay, so you're saying that the roof can be viewed as fair game because it's not performing any commercial function
anything
other than shelter.
Yeah, it's a roof.
Right.
It keeps us dry. It doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
But if you put solar panels up there, it becomes a potential or future commercial use.
Yeah.
Therefore, they can turn around and say, no, we don't want the telco equipment up there anymore. But then the other very interesting element to this is that the ECC gives huge powers to the telcos to challenge this in the courts. So anytime the landowner goes, no, I don't want this, you can challenge it in the court.
Yeah.
And you're not challenging it in the magistrates, you're challenging it in the land the land court of the upper tribunal or something like that. So it's a QC court.
Yeah.
It's Crown Courts. Very expensive, not very quick.
Right.
There's only one court in the UK which actually listens to these cases. So all you need is you need to gather a couple of conflicts, and you've got a bottleneck. So if you've got a conflict on a very important 5G site that you want to set up in London, this could be 2 years down the line because you've got this massive bottleneck of court cases to be heard in this court. So it could be, I mean, the pendulum going too far could be an absolute bureaucratic and legal nightmare in the future.
Yeah.
Well, on the sort of public versus private thing, I'm gonna sort of be my own devil's advocate and actually make a sort of statist point, which is they have these spectrum auctions. They raise a bunch of money. It just goes into the general coffer for them to spend on, subsidised drinks in the House of Commons or whatever. I think there's an argument for the state to go off and purchase little sort of 10 square metre plots of land from a bunch of farmers and make those little bits of land state-owned.
But you'd still have to have access to that land.
Yeah. Well, that would have to be part of the negotiation. But
then you got to pay the farmers, and then how much do you pay the farmers?
Well, but again, you could. Well, but then part of the, this is just off the top of my head. I'm just thinking it now. It's probably not going to bear close scrutiny. But part of that deal is you go, all right, farmer, is $100,000. Now the state owns that 10 square metres of land and gets unlimited access to it through this channel that we're going to construct that doesn't mess with your pigs or your wheat or whatever. And then the state charges the operators and thus directly regulates it. That's some argument. There's probably lots of holes in that, and I'm generally instinctively.
But it's still the same thing, isn't it? Because it's the landowner's property in the first instance. Therefore, someone has to intervene.
Yeah, so
to force a sale. Or
you're talking about compulsory purchase.
Yeah, which runs completely contrary to all my best instincts. I just thought I'd chuck it out there.
You're either forcing the price down and saying you have to do it this way, or we buy it and do it this way.
But then the other thing to consider there is how do you actually put the antenna up? Who owns that antenna? There's going to be a weight limit on these antenna.
You mean the tower?
Tower, yeah. Who owns the passive infrastructure?
Yeah.
How big do you build it? Who gets first bite at the cherry of putting antenna on there? Because there's a weight limit to these towers, how much you can put on. Then you got to put do you have a state-owned tower company then, like a state-owned Cellnex or something like that? Or a state-owned Arqiva, or do you farm it out to Arqiva?
Totally. And then another idea I'd have that's more sort of soft touch is just regulation, just setting the price that the farmers can charge. But having said that, that still doesn't solve the problem, because then the farmers could still do their pigsty manoeuvre.
That would probably be
tricky.
That'll probably be the fairest way to do it, but that's what they're trying to do. But the argument is they've set it too low.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So the ECC says, well, this is a fair level for compensation, but then that compensation could be ridiculously low.
Landowners got to be properly compensated.
Oh, they do, 100%.
People build properties and they make investments and they deserve to have something back from it. I'm not saying it should be given away free, but
and they've got planning laws that prevent them.
Too much the other way around is.
My suspicion, because it's very difficult to actually understand until I'm trying to chase up on this, until you actually see the contracts from pre-ECC and the post-ECC contracts. It's actually very difficult to judge, who's been screwed either way.
Someone's always going to moan.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get my hands on, actually speaking to a few people. I'm looking at a few pre and post contracts to actually assess, this is how much they were getting paid. This is how much they're now getting paid after the ECC has been applied. But the tricky problem is that there's not too many of these contracts flown around, because it was passed in 2017. Obviously, the telcos want to sign long-term contracts with the landowners. So these, apparently. Speaking to my legal friends, a lot of these contracts are coming up either this year or next year or the year after. So it's actually not a huge number of examples of pre and post expired ECC contracts that are relevant. Something that was originally signed in 2011 isn't going to be relevant today. So we need to look at the ones that are maybe signed in like 2017, 2016. And then compare it to, but they're probably not going to expire until 2021, or if it's a 10-year contract, 2026. So you don't actually know. It's an interesting argument, but actually getting to the bottom conclusion,
hard data on it,
probably not going to be till next year.
One last point. I'll make on that, and then we'll wrap up unless you've got anything else to say on it, Ian, is that the interesting thing about this industry that we bang on about every Friday is that it's a private enterprise, being an operator, there are no, outside of some weird bits of India, there are no sort of publicly owned operators. But it's heavily regulated because the barriers to entry are so high, and increasingly it's even more heavily regulated because mobile infrastructure is considered absolutely critical to the economic health of the country. So it becomes a public concern that's entirely delivered by private enterprise. So that makes for an interesting conundrum in itself. So that means that there's plenty of economic and almost even moral arguments for state intervention in the sector, because for someone to be unconnected to a mobile network, it is
so
diminishes their quality of life,
like the water or the energy or the railway sectors.
But do you know what the big difference there is? Those industries were privatized after the network's built.
Yeah.
So it was public coffers that went into building the network.
It's the same with BT though. BT's network.
The fixed line,
No, it's a private entity now that rolled out 4G and 5G.
Oh, sure, yeah. But the original PSTN was built with public sector funds.
But
what's that stand for?
Public switch telephone network.
Right, the fixed line.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But
this is why it's such an issue trying to upgrade that to fibre. You're still using copper that was there from the days of it being a public entity.
But this is where telecoms is completely different to the electricity network or pipes for water or gas lines. That 95% of the investment that was going into that was done. And you're not spending.
Yeah, on the mobile side, yeah.
No. For mobile, you spent how much it's a cost to lay that network, and how much has been spent by private industry to put, fibre upgrades, 2G, 5G, 3G, 4G, 5G over the top of that. It's all private infrastructure as private investments.
But on the mobile side, I know it's all private. Definitely, I totally agree with you there. But the original fixed line network, all those ducts and poles that people are talking about, that was all done with public sector money in the first place. Those ducts and poles are really old. That's
fine.
all.
Fine. But I'm still saying it's not comparable.
It's not the fibre
with
that's
water.
expensive. It's the digging up the streets to put it in that's the expensive side of it.
Well, okay, fine. But
I think you're agreeing with each other on the mobile side.
On the mobile side, definitely, yeah,
fine. But all the last mile stuff, they're still digging up streets.
Civil engineering is most of the cost.
But they're still doing that now. They're still doing that for fibre.
Yeah, and people like Virgin and all that sort of thing.
They're still digging up
streets. But I sympathise with Ian's point about, as a core owner of a bunch
that's why they want
of
access to BT's
backbone infrastructure.
Yeah.
So,
but I think, but this is where I think the difference between like those utilities and this is why it should be so heavily regulated. Because 95% of the expense was worn by the public sector, whereas if you look at let's tie telecommunications in as an entire bundle, 95% of the network that we look at today has been privately funded, not publicly funded.
Mobile,
telecommunications, I'm saying.
Yeah, but fixed line. I've got to go with Ian. You're the vast majority of fixed line. I think what you're saying is because of the replacement. Yeah, because it's now largely fibre or
they're still digging up last mile, and that's where a lot of they're still doing street construction.
But that
they're not doing enough. There's only 8% of UK homes that have fibre to the premise. So
how much is that going to cost to do that last mile?
Yeah.
How much is that going to cost?
I don't know. A lot of money.
Quite a lot
of
money.
Otherwise, someone would do it, wouldn't
and
they?
who's paying for it?
Yeah, that's now private.
Yeah, so that's why it's completely different to the
utilities network. That doesn't contradict
but the
Ian's
utilities
point
now that are privately owned would still, I don't know enough about water and energy, but presumably they upgrade their infrastructure as well. The railways upgrade their infrastructure and have done in the private sector era. And they're doing it with, as privately owned companies now.
No, they're not. Railway's completely different. Railway is publicly owned because Network Rail, which owns all the things. Yeah, so that's still
water
private for a bit,
gas,
wasn't it?
Electricity, the other utilities.
But they're not actually digging anything up, are they? Because we still got the same pipes. if that makes sense. Like they say in
London.
Well,
they do dig it up, don't they? Dig the streets up
and do civil engineering the same
work.
as what they're doing with telecommunications.
I've got a thought exercise that might put this in some kind of perspective. If you were going to start from scratch, if the UK is completely greenfield and had no telecoms infrastructure at all, fixed or mobile, the amount of cost that would have to do the sort of core ducts and poles, fixed line stuff, not last mile stuff, is still significant, and that was paid for by a public fund, and then everything after that, your point's right. So I think you both got good points. You're just talking about different bits of the network, but my point was more to what extent, when something is private but has very high barrier to entry and has become a matter of public interest in terms of industrial policy and economic policy, to what extent does that give the public sector, the government, the right to sort of poke their nose in? And of course, back to the equilibrium that we started on with your thing of going too far one way or the other. They start poking their nose in too much, then it stops being a profitable enterprise, and people start saying sod it, like they're threatening to do in India, for example.
But I suppose the poking, coming back to the Northern Ireland thing, the poking the nose in is because, everybody, like you say, everybody considers it to be so strategically important. Therefore, if we have a situation where landowners are clubbing together and going, we don't want you on, and then you're looking at not being able to get any sites out at all.
Quite.
And
yet on the flip side, you can't completely. That was one of the biggest criticisms.
You can't screw them entirely.
Do you remember Corbyn's thing about nationalising broadband?
Yeah,
that's just a gross, massive appropriation of private assets.
I mean, that is a massive issue, because you could see, although there is a lot of consolidation on sites now, UK regulations dictates that there can only be so much consolidation, because you build the maximum, the biggest tower you possibly can in the UK. It's only going to be able to support so much infrastructure, correct?
Yeah.
Look, structural engineering, physics dictates that.
Can't just keep heaping antennas on top.
Yeah, you can't just carry on doing that.
Transmitters.
But the maximum size, because this is back to a Vodafone complaint from years ago, the maximum size of cell towers in the UK is quite considerably shorter than the rest of Europe. They can't build higher.
Okay, that's just an arbitrary regulatory sort of restriction.
In the UK.
Nasty.
Right. Yeah, because it doesn't look nice.
But then we'll stick a bloody great big wind farm up next to it.
But so this is if there is a consolidation of sites, and it is becoming a lot more difficult to acquire new sites because of these legal challenges and the difficulties that some of the farmers are posing, you've got to go back to regulation, and you've got to turn around and say, well, actually, let's double the maximum size of masts, so their coverage cones can be significantly wider, and you can support more antenna on it.
Yeah. They've got to do something.
They've got to do something.
Something's got to give, and that's what's interesting about our industry is that there's no escaping, even for someone like me who would like the government to have as little involvement in my daily life as possible. I have to completely acknowledge that the state has to be involved in telecoms.
Yeah.
Otherwise, loads of people are going to. Otherwise, the country will suffer as a consequence.
Because the other thing you've got to consider is there's absolutely no way you can stop developing new sites. I mean, that has to happen.
Especially 5G and densification and all that.
Well, and there are some arguments that you could use microwave, or you could you put in massive MIMO or these new technologies, and that improves the sort of the connectivity quality and efficiency of these sites. But the other thing you've got to bear in mind is that, irrelevant of how good you get mobile signal, we've still got hills in this country. We've still got houses. We've still got trees. And I know there is propagation is being improved. There's still no way to get across. There's still no way to get through a massive hill.
Yeah.
If it's a huge hill, you've still got to go over it or around it. Yeah. You cannot go through it. So you do need to build more sites.
Cool. Okay. We've definitely hit about the hour mark, haven't we, Pierre? So I'll wrap it up there. That was a good chat, guys. We haven't lost a step over the Christmas period.
No.
And thank you for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.